So this lesson's about Washington's presidency. He's our first president for about 8 years, and a lot goes on while he's president. So to help you understand this, we're going to focus on some of the problems, what caused those problems, and how they got solved. And it seems like the best way to really get into that is by sort of a chart like this. You're strongly encouraged to kind of follow along with this, maybe make a list like this of your own. I'm going to get rid of those arrows in a moment because they're just going to kind of get in the way. And we're going to focus on these basically one at a time. Some have multiple causes. So we're going to get started here. The first cause, I'll zoom in a little bit farther here. Washington really needed to define this job of president. No one had done this before. But one reason why that's a problem for him is the Constitution was not really clear about what powers the president would have. It lists some powers, of course, but he really needed to define that job, and the Constitution was not very helpful for that. The other reason this was a problem is there was a lot of pressure on him and on this new country to succeed. This is an experiment, and Washington really felt the pressure of making sure that he didn't mess up. Especially after all the work he'd put in during the war. So this gets solved in a couple of ways by Washington. One is that he gathers what's called a cabinet. He called a cabinet. Think of like a kitchen cabinet with lots of different kinds of foods or things you can pick from. He was able to pick from leaders. So he created extra jobs that people could be sitting around a table and make decisions together. So it was more of a shared decision. So he's not acting as a tyrant or like a king, like some people were afraid that he would. And the other thing he does, he really tries to lead as a role model rather than making people do things, or he certainly doesn't act like a politician. He tries to lead the same kind of successful way that worked for him as a military general in the war. He tries to lead by example, trying not to be too fancy. Like a king would be, for example. All right. Another problem, though, is that there are many arguments in that cabinet. And this is caused in one way by men from the North, and you have men from the South who still distrust each other. Some of this is about slavery, but you also have other kinds of arguments going on between them as well. They're kind of from different cultures. And so that leads to some things. And you still have different opinions about how much power the federal government should have and how much power the state should have. So these North versus South, strong federal, weak federal kind of arguments really go on around that table. And that leads to two things. One positive one is you get a compromise about where the U.S. Capitol should go. It's not far up in the north and it's not far down in the south. It's really kind of in between, and there are some interesting stories behind that. The other thing that happens is that political parties emerge. Some folks who used to be friends turn into enemies of each other. The kind of political parties, they weren't called Republican and Democrat, but it's basically the same kind of idea. So that's something we could get into more detail later on. A third big problem that comes up is there's a rebellion called the Whiskey Rebellion. You have hundreds and hundreds of farmers in the inland areas away from the coast who rebelled. Why? Because of a tax. The federal government made a new tax on alcohol, like whiskey. And these farmers were rebelling against that with the same kind of no taxation without representation argument that started leading us into this new country. What happens is U.S. soldiers crush it. Washington doesn't give this rebellion any time to grow. He sends soldiers in and they end it fairly quickly. This surprises some people that he acts in this way, but again, we can get into that later on too. Okay, so this is a more economic kind of issue here with the Whiskey Rebellion. All levels of government, the national government, the state governments, and frankly, many people are, as Washington becomes president, they're poor. They need money, and there are two good reasons why. One is still all those high costs of money and also of lives. There's still some war debts from that Revolutionary War. Even though it ended a few years earlier, that's still a big problem. And there were very few federal taxes. Why not? Because the government from before the Constitution came in, right, that Confederation, Articles of Confederation Congress, didn't pass a lot of taxes. Uh, didn't force the states or people to pay much in tax. So those, especially the national governments, really need some money. So that leads to two things. There are two ways this problem starts getting solved. One is a man named Alexander Hamilton. He was a member of that cabinet of Washington's. He's the one in charge of the money, and he has an idea to make a national bank. A national bank instead of being in charge of it by certain states. His idea was there'd be a national bank that could help out. And his other idea that comes along is having new taxes on imports, on things that come in from other countries. And there's a special word for that, a tariff. So that wouldn't cost the people in America. It would cost the person who's bringing something into this country. And those would be taxes for the U.S. government to help the government get more money. Okay. The final problem we're going to get into here, and in some ways this might be the most serious, is once again Washington's involved in a possible war. This happens mostly in his second term as president. He needs, and Congress need to decide about war or peace. Are they going to go to war again? And this may be confusing. Why would there be another war? Well, there's a revolution in France, and that puts France and England at war again with each other. This is a revolution in favor of democracy, kind of like the American Revolution. France fights against England once again. Why would that be our problem in America? Because both sides are demanding help from the United States, or else they would react against us. So we're really it really puts George Washington in a tough situation. Which side to support? Can we even afford to support one side or the other? If we don't support them, then what might they do to us? How's that going to get solved? Again, this might be the toughest problem that Washington had. And what he ends up deciding is sending folks to make peace treaties to keep the U.S. neutral, not helping either side. It's going to keep us out of both wars by not helping England, by not helping France, keep them both off of our backs. Does it work? Well, sort of, but you get many angry Americans who wanted us to help one side or the other. And of course you have many angry Europeans as well, many angry French people, many angry English people. And this anger is really going to spill over into the next president. That's going to be John Adams, is going to be the second president. But we'll get into that another time. So just to try to zoom back here, take a broader look at all this. There we go. So again, you had 5 problems. Some of them had more than one cause leading up to them. Some of them led to more than one. And all this is going on in Washington's first presidency, his 8 years as our first president. So make sure that you're able to give some details about these 5 different problems right here. Try not to mix them up. And you can rewatch this anytime that you need to. Thanks.